a number of so-called experts, such as Dr. Oblivious, PhD, gas bag. I'll bet you have too. And as a matter of fact, I think I had a professor that fit that description pretty appropriately. But they've offered this permissive and unworkable advice to parents about child rearing for at least 60 years. The misinformation that they've spread about accounts for much of the confusion that we see today about the nature of children and how to manage them properly. But parents are also handicapped by another problem. It has to do with the disappearance of the extended family. You know, in the past, grandmothers and aunts and neighbor women showed new moms how to mother, and they taught them invaluable parenting techniques and encouragement. But now young moms are pretty much on their own, and there's no one around to provide needed counsel and advice. And without that wisdom and experience, many parents look at the babies that they've born and they have no idea how to discipline or train or guide them. You see what I'm talking about in restaurants and airports and supermarkets, where mothers often seem just totally frustrated with their unruly boys and girls. You know, I once knew a mother like that who had 4 children that were totally out of control. I mean, they were loud and aggressive and disrespectful to adults. And this mother's system of controlling them came down to a very simple formula. When they became especially noisy or cantankerous there in the backyard, she would rush out the door about once every hour and scream, "I have had it with you kids. I've just had it with you." And then she'd turn and go back in the house. I don't think they even knew she was there. Apparently this mom felt it was sufficient for her to kind of burst out the back door like a cuckoo clock every hour or so and remind them that she was still on the job. There has to be a better way to deal with difficult kids than that. Let's look briefly at the discipline of children and consider why it's so important to lead them with confidence.
I hate being the bad guy. I'd like to be the soft, quiet mom that says, "Oh, honey, would you do this?" And the child says, "Sure, Mom," with a beatific smile and goes off and obeys.
Well, I understand how difficult it is to confront a child who's misbehaving because, you know, we love our kids so much, and it makes us uncomfortable to feel like we're the bad guy at home. Nevertheless, it is important to understand that discipline is not something parents do to a child. It's something that's done for him or her because kids need to know where the boundaries are. Let me illustrate. Imagine that you're driving a car over a huge canyon, such as the Royal Gorge in Colorado. And that bridge, of course, is suspended hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. Now, suppose there are no guardrails on the side of the bridge. Where would you steer your car? Well, right down the middle, of course. You know, you need those protective railings even though you don't plan to hit them. You just feel more secure knowing that they're there. Well, that's the same way it is with children. There is security and defined limits. They need to know precisely what the rules are and who's available to enforce them. And when these clear boundaries exist at home, you know, a child never gets in trouble unless he deliberately asks for it. And as long as he stays within those reasonable, well-marked guardrails, there's happiness and freedom and acceptance for everybody. Well, let's look in again on Dr. Oblivious as he illustrates for us the importance of defined limits.
We now return to Time Out for Parents, featuring your host, renowned parenting expert, Dr. Boswell Oblivious, PhD, DHB, and BOLOGMA. Today, Dr. Oblivious has ordered workers to remove the walls of our studio in order to give his children the freedom they so richly deserve. It may be hurricane season, but not to worry. Dr. Oblivious knows what he's doing. What matters is that these children are free to be creative.
As I hope Dr. Oblivious observed there, you know, there are matters of safety to be considered in these issues. I remember one day when our kids were very young, I was watching their hamster run around in his cage. And he was gnawing on the bars and trying to lift the cage door and doing everything he could to escape. Then I noticed our little dog Siggy, Sigmund Freud, watching that hamster from the shadows. And his ears were pointed straight up, and I knew exactly what he was thinking. He was thinking, come on, baby, break through to freedom. I'll give you a ride you'll never forget. Now, if that little hamster had been so unfortunate as to have achieved his desire for freedom, he'd have been dead in a matter of seconds. We could see that from where we were. Loving discipline operates like that. Even when it is caring and loving, it may seem like a cage to some children because they lack the perspective to see what awaits them beyond the bars. If you love your kids, lead them. You have the authority to take charge at home. Use it.
كنت عايز بس اتكلم شويه بالعربي اول حاجه قالها يعني نقطه خطيره جدا. ايه المشكله بتاعت الامهات في البلد دي؟ مفيش extended family، مفيش جراند مادرز، مفيش جده، مفيش خاله، فهم تقريبا ايه تماما مع نفسهم. دي مشكله في مصر. احنا لما اتربينا كان في الريفرنس بتاعنا، يقول لك الريفرنس بتاع العيل. يعني ايه ريفرنس؟ يعني لما يحب يقارن نفسه بالناس اللي حواليه يلاقي ناس ثانيه بتفكر صح، لكن هنا هلاقي ناس ثانيه بتفكر ايه؟ غلط. مفيش ريفرنس، لان انا بس. فهنا اكتر من اي مكان تاني انا محتاج ان انا ابقى ايه؟ فيري سترونج. النقطه الثانيه اللي بيقولها في الحته دي، النقطة الثانية اللي قالها اللي هي مهمة، قال إن الديسبلين مش بس علشان أنا أرتاح وأربي العيل، دي كمان هي إيه؟ سيفتي. فقال لك مثلها بالكوبري اللي له إيه؟ لما تقول له آدي الحدود بتاعتك ووراك الفار اللي بيحاول يهرب من البتاع، هو نفسه يبقى حر. يعني هو العيل كده، العيل عايز يهرب من الكيش، لكن مين بيستنيه بره؟ كده هياكله. فانا شايف من بعيد لكن هو مش شايف حاجه، هو فاكر ان دي الفن اللي في الدنيا كله. فدي نقطتين مهمين جدا. فدي اول حاجه، ان احنا لازم نبقى مقتنعين لازم في ديسبلين. ايه الديسبلين ده بقى؟ النقطه الثانيه اللي عايز اسال عليها، طب امتى العيل احط له ديسبلين وامتى ايه اطبطب عليه؟ دي النقطه الثانيه. الفيديو اللي جاي ده الفرق ما بين العيل اللي عايز في حاجتين، في يسموها irresponsibility. يعني ايه irresponsibility؟ irresponsible عكس responsibility. ما عندوش احساس بالمسؤوليه، والعيل من حقه في السن الصغير انه يبقى ايه؟ ما عندوش احساس بالمسؤوليه. انا عيل عنده 5 سنين وقع لك فازه ولا وقع لك كوبايه وكسرها، همسكه في نوم؟ يعني ففي فرق بين دي وبين ايه، او نسي مثلا كتبه في حته، نسي ساعته، نسي شنطته. انا هتوجعني هتوجع قلبي، لكن هو في نفس الوقت ما يقدرش اطلب منه اكتر من كده. لكن الفرق بينه عيل بيتحداني. هنشوف الفيديو ده اللي جاي ونشوف ايه راي جيمس دوبسون فيه.
أبونا it would be great that our kids watch this too.
They should. الفيديو اللي جاي اسمه الفرق بين
the joys of shopping in the modern grocery, an experience to share with the little ones you love. What parent could resist bringing a child to the Mini Maxi Mart, discovering a new and colorful world of merchandise, carefully displayed and awaiting the young customers' thoughtful examination? Each visit to the store brings new meaning to the phrase, supermarket sweep. Yes, it's a proud moment when your son or daughter boldly proclaims his or her purchasing preferences. Congratulations, Mom. This newfound assertiveness is just a taste of things to come.
Have you ever been there? I assure you that I have. In fact, I recently witnessed a similar situation when my wife and I made a quick trip to the supermarket to pick up a few items. And when we arrived, we immediately noticed a woman shopper and her 5-year-old boy that were engaged in this kind of clash of wills. He had apparently demanded that she buy something, and then he threw a classic temper tantrum when she refused. The conflict was still brewing when they reached the checkout counter where they were standing in line. Now, we were standing right behind them, and we were close enough to hear the conversation that was going on between them. And she leaned down to her son and spoke very quietly, and she said, "I was going to give you what you asked for, but there's no way I can do it now. We just don't reward that kind of behavior." But this little lad wasn't going to back off, and he continued to snort and complain. And that prompted his mom to say matter-of-factly, "Do you know what's going to happen when we get home?" "Yes," he said. "Well, what?" she asked him. "A swat," he said. "Yep, and if you keep acting like this, it'll be 2. And I tell you, with that, the battle was over. Junior settled down and behaved like a little gentleman. Now, believe me, I rarely interject myself into these kinds of parental episodes, but this was an exception. This woman deserved a word of praise. And so I said, "You're a good mother." And she said, with a smile on her face, "Well, it isn't easy." And I knew she meant it. Now, let's see if we can help make it easier for others who are watching by trying to understand what was going on there. It is very important to distinguish between 2 categories of behavior that should be handled in entirely different ways. Maybe this will help explain the distinction. Suppose little Chris is acting silly in the living room and he falls into a table and he breaks some expensive china cups. Or maybe he loses his books on the way home from school, or he leaves his bike out in the rain, or he spills his milk while sitting at the breakfast table. Now, these are what I call acts of childish irresponsibility, which are just inevitable during the early years because kids are like that. They forget things, they lose things, they spill things, they fall off things, and they eat horrible things. This is just the nature of childhood. And when it happens, it should be handled very gently and with understanding. But there is another category of behavior that is far more problematic. For example, when a child stamps her little foot in anger and tells her mom or her dad to shut up, or when a 3-year-old is called and then runs the other way. See, in those cases, something very different is going on. She's moved into the realm of what I call willful defiance. It occurs when the child knows what the parent wants, but she clenches her little fists and digs in her heels and prepares for a battle. Now, willful defiance occurs when the child clearly refuses to accept parental leadership. And when this kind of nose-to-nose confrontation occurs, a firm response is in order. Why? Because the question being asked is, who's in charge here? Now, if a parent equivocates at that moment, a strong-willed child, I guarantee you, will precipitate other battles designed to ask that same question again and again. That's just the way he or she thinks. So what about the little unpleasantness at the mini Maxi Mart? Was it childish irresponsibility or willful defiance? Let's look at the instant replay.
There's Mom coming down the field. Mom is saying something. It's a warning. That's right. Bobby has been warned not to get out of the cart. Let's look at the next play. Bobby makes the pitch. But Mom isn't biting. It's a definite no. Mom had called the plays, but Bobby wouldn't follow the game plan. And the referee makes the call. Willful defiance.
Well, the referee made the right call because it was willful defiance. Bobby was challenging the authority of his mom, and she needed to be strong because the behavior represented a direct confrontation with him.
يبقى ايه الفرق بين عدم المسؤولية بتاعت الأطفال وبين التحدي للسلطان بتاع الأب والأم؟ ايه الفرق؟
هو الأول هي مش حاسة إن دي حاجة مهمة إن هي تتجوز كده، لكن مش بروز
ايه الفرق بين ان العيل يبقى مش مسؤول ممكن نسامحه على حاجه زي كده انه عيل، يقول لك ده عيل عيل وغلط.
يعني مثلا في الأول نقطة بتاعت البنت لما تحط الطبق على الدش ووش الطبق
طب.
دي برضه أساس عدم مسؤولية.
يعني هو الفكره كلها هل بيتحداني ولا لا؟
الثاني بيتحدى.
هو ده لما بيتحدى الاب والام ويعملها كنوع من التحدي لازم تعمل ايه؟ لازم تقف باي سكه. بس هي الفكره بقى السؤال اللي انا عايز اساله على دي، ازاي توقف؟ هو القصه دي لما تقروها كويس بتاع التحدي بتاع المسؤوليه بتاع الاب والام، تحدي الاسره بتاع التحدي الاسره اللي هي بالعربيه السلطه، يقول لك اتس بوينتس، يحسبوا نقط. يعني انت تقول له على حاجه ما تعملهاش، لو هو عملها يبقى ايه؟ خد بوينت. لو قلت تاني وما عملهاش يبقى خد ايه؟ بوينت. كل ان انا اكرر ان انا اقولها في مصلحه مين؟
مش مصلحته.
مصلحته هو، لاني انا بكرر ومفيش حاجه ايه؟ بتحصل. يبقى هو انا بنزل كأسرتي كسلطان بنزل وهو ايه؟ بيعمل. It is points, it's a system of points. Every time you say something, you give an order or you give a command and the child doesn't do it, you lose a point, he gains or she gains a point. So repeating it is not in your favor. You have to take an action. هنتكلم دلوقتي على the steps how to deal with this. This is extremely important. The child who does not know the authority of the parents is in a very dangerous place. Very dangerous place.
أبونا جيمس أوبسن كان بيقول إن this is very critical to be done before 9 years old because after 9 years old it's so much harder.
It is harder.
Set your authority. Yeah.
Yes. It is harder after the kids are older. 9 years old when they said their ego becomes very defined and I.
أنا نفسي حاجة زي كده بس في نفس الوقت إزاي تديهم confidence نفسهم مع كتاب.
That's what he's going to do. Now we're going to go into steps. How do you affirm your authority as a parent without losing love؟ من غير ما تفقدهم الإحساس إن أنت بتحبهم وإن أنت respect. Did you notice something in these clips؟ إيه اللي لاحظتوه لما الأب والأم بيتكلموا على عيل؟
Very lovely.
بينزل على مستواه عشان يبقى
بينزل على ركبه. ما بيكلموش كده. ما بيكلمش العيال كده. They don't speak like this to them. When they want to talk to them, yes. كمان I think برضه psychologically, when you grab the child and bring them up in a conflict, you're actually making them feel insecure. They like you're tiny. Yes. You're tiny and I'm grabbing you, I'm going to control you, I'm going to... They get scared. They might actually have a problem. فأحسن إن أنا أعمل إيه؟ أنزل لهم على مستواهم. إحنا man to man, بس I'm an authority. Okay? Next. The 6 steps to the discipline, the essentials of discipline. يبقى أول حاجة قلنا إن إحنا محتاجين للديسيبلين عشان السكيورتي. تاني حاجة محتاجين نفرق بين responsibility and defiance. What are the 6 steps of good discipline he's talking about?
I talk today about the 6 basic steps to good child discipline.
Dr. James Dobson for Family Talk.
First, define the boundaries very clearly in advance. If you haven't spelled them out, don't try to enforce them. Second, once a child clearly understands what's expected, she can be held accountable for behaving accordingly. This sounds easy, but as every parent knows, it often leads to a contest of wills with the child.
It is, in my opinion, very important for a parent to win those confrontations when they occur. Third, distinguish between willful defiance and childish irresponsibility. Forgetting things and losing things and breaking things and spilling things are not challenges to adult leadership, and they should be handled very gently. Fourth, reassure and teach as soon as the time of confrontation is over. A youngster between 2 and 7, or even older, may want to be reassured in that moment. By all means, hold him close and use that opportunity to explain lovingly what has just occurred. Fifth, avoid impossible demands. Be absolutely sure your child is capable of delivering what you require. And sixth, let love be your guide. A relationship that's characterized by genuine love and affection is likely to be a healthy one, even though some parental mistakes and errors are inevitable. That's the bare skeleton. We'll put some meat on those bones in future commentaries.
Dr. James Dobson for Family Talk.
Child discipline.
Dr. James Dobson for Family Talk.
First, define the boundaries very clearly in advance. If you haven't spelled them out, don't try to enforce them.
بيقول هنا ان قبل ما تعاقب العيل على حاجه او يعني تقف قدامه وتتخانق معاه، الاول قول له انت عايز ايه منه. احنا احيانا بنفترض ان العيل عارف، وغالبا هو ايه؟ شك. عيل قد كيكو. he can understand، بيفهم كويس جدا ودماغه نظيفه جدا، يقدر يفهم اللي انت هتقوله له. المشكله اللي هتيجي بعد كده اذا كان هيسمع ولا لا.
But what age you would at least start at?
As young as 2. As young as 2. As long as they can understand speech, they should be taught how to respect the parent authority. فدي أول حاجة لازم أقول له، عشان كده بس أحد برضه نفس الكلام in the class. You have to define the boundaries. تقول لهم أنا عايز منكم كذا كذا كذا، وإذا طلعت حاجة جديدة هضيفها للليستة. يعني I don't have the dictionary بتاع كل boundaries, but every time I have something that I need to tell them, I will add it to the list. It's okay. It's my prerogative that I can add to the list. I am the parent. تمام؟ يبقى أول حاجة لازم أقول إيه ال boundaries. What are the boundaries? Okay. The next one.
Second, once a child clearly understands what's expected, she can be held accountable for behaving accordingly. This sounds easy, but as every parent knows, it often leads to a contest of wills with the child.
بعد كده لو أنا قلت حاجة، دي النقطة الثانية. لو قلت الموضوع ده أنا مش عايزه، لازم إيه؟ بمعنى أصح لو عمله لازم أعمل إيه؟ لازم أقف. ما ينفعش إن أنا أطنش. once قلت مش عايز مثلا في فصل مدرسة الأحد مثلا، أنا بقى بطبق الموضوع ده في الهيكل. once قلت أنا مش عايز كلام في الهيكل. once واحد يتكلم بطلعه بره، قلت له هتتكلم هطلع بره. مش كلام في الهيكل. فلا أنا مراقب، لو شماس اتكلم ودي معاه، لو اتكلم هعمل إيه؟ مش هطنش. يبقى مش باوندرز. تمام؟ يبقى once قلت حاجة لازم هطبقها. الثالثة
It is, in my opinion, very important for a parent to win those confrontations when they occur. Third, distinguish between willful defiance and childish irresponsibility.
نفرق بقى ما بين ان هو بيكسر حاجة، بيوقع حاجة، بينسى حاجة، وبين ان هو بيتحداني. في فرق، في حاجة فيها تحدي، في حاجة مش تحدي. لو ما فيهاش تحدي دي مش هعرف عليها.
Forgetting things and losing things and breaking things and spilling things are not challenges to adult leadership, and they should be handled very gently. Fourth, reassure and teach as soon as the time of confrontation is over. A youngster between 2 and 7, or even older, may want to be reassured in that moment. By all means, hold him close and use that opportunity to explain lovingly what has just occurred.
لازم نتكلم عن اللي حصل. ونفهمهم ان احنا بنحبهم. الموضوع ده ما هوش ايه يعني هيفضل هو عيل وانا هفضل ايه ابوه او امه. حتى لو انا عايز افرض السلطان بتاعي كاب وام، انا هفرضها وهرجع تاني افهمه ان انا ايه بعمل كده عشان بحبه مش عشان بكرهه. احنا مش في تحدي. انت يمكن كالصغير بيبص لها انها تحدي، انا هنزله المستوى ارجع تاني اقول له انا بحبك بس انا ابوك او انا امك. I have to bring them back to their place and tell them that I love them. This is extremely important عشان العيل ما ياخدهاش الموضوع بقى ايه حمله سياسيه، يرشح نفسه انتخابات قدامي يعني انا الرئيس في البيت ده.
بس يقولوا ساعات بيكبوا حاجه او بيكسروا حاجه وهم عارفين ان هم بيعملوا كده، يعني مش اكسن.
هو يعملها وباصص لك؟ لا، ما ده تحدي. ده تحدي. يس.
Childish irresponsibility also should have consequences. I know it's not as bad as تحدي، بس برضه لازم يكون في عقاب. يعني واحد مثلا بينسى الكتاب كل يوم في المدرسه.
ما هي لو عاده I need to help them to get rid of it whatever the way it is. بس it should not be. هي كل الفكره do you sense defiance in it or not؟ هل فيها نوع من التحدي ليا ولا لا؟ هي كل البوينت اللي احنا عايزين نتكلم عليها الباوندريز دي، ان يفضل الاب والام اب وام والعيل ايه؟ ابن او بنت. لان هم محتاجين لكده. they need it. if they don't have that they're gonna lose a lot. وانا شايف قدام اللي هيحصل. انا شايف قدام they're gonna have a lot of trouble in society. they're gonna get in a lot of trouble with the law. they're gonna get a lot of trouble with the social setup. There's gonna be a consequence to that, losing authority.
Fifth, avoid impossible demands. Be absolutely sure your child is capable of delivering what you require. And sixth, let love be your guide.
حته الامبوسيبل ديماندز قبل ما نحط الباوندريز نقول لهم على حاجات يقدروا يعملوها، بلاش نديهم حاجات ما يقدروش يعملوها. انا ما عنديش امثله منها. Okay, any questions about this part؟ عشان دي it's extremely important but it's simple. هي كل الفكره بقى ان انت ما تخافش. واحده من الحاجات اللي I think it's very important we should not be afraid. Your kids is not gonna hate you. حتى لو قالوا كده. And sometimes a child would stand and say, I hate you. Okay. Go ahead. Be my guest. أيوة.
What if you're gonna run out of the ways of sort of punishment أو أي حاجة إن أنا أقول له أنا عندي steps كده بعملها بس بطلع gradually. أول حاجة بقول له مش عارف كده غلط هزعل منك، بعد كده الستيب الثانية بشيل مثلا لعبة من اللعب بتاعته، بعد كده بشيل له ستيكر، خلاص I run out بقى أو في البانشمنت خالص.
No, we can never run out. We can never run out. No, don't run out. يعني آخر ما فيها أنا هقول لك حاجة. هو في كلام تاني على موضوع الديسيبلين ده how you do it. Sometimes the discipline doesn't have to be that punishment. You don't punish. Sometimes the discipline هي الثيوري النظرية بتقول ايه؟ بتقول ان كل فعل له رد فعل. هتعمل حاجة يبقى لازم تتوقع مني ايه؟ رد فعل. لو انا مش هعمل حاجة باللي انت بتعمله يبقى انت من حقك تعمل ايه؟ تكمل. اعمل اللي انت عايزه. هي كل الفكرة ان انا بقف وبقول له انا عايز تفسير للي حصل. فاحيانا بيعملوا ايه؟ يقول لك لما يكون الموضوع مثلا انت بتنادي على ابنك you call your son or daughter but they don't come. عمال بيلعب في المكعبات. فلان هو سامع. فممكن تروح تعمل ايه؟ تروح قاعد جنبه تحط ايدك على كتفه تقول له ايه؟ مالك؟ في ايه؟ بس. ها؟ مثلا انا بس بقول مالك في ايه؟ يعني ممكن يقول لك ايه انا مش عايز اجي مش عايز اكل انا مستمتع جدا بالمكعبات دي. طب خليني ايه اساعدك ان احنا لو انا عندي العلاقه دي مع العيل يبقى كويس، لكن لو ما عنديش العلاقه مع العيل هقول له بعد كده مره ثانيه لما هنادي عليك مره الثانيه اللي انت بتلعب فيها يتاخد من غير نقاش. لكن لو انا عندي العلاقه دي من الاول وبحط ايدي عليه واقدر اكلمه كده لما يحس ان انا ايه وقفت، ان هي الفكره كلها احسسه ان انا ايه؟ ان انا مش هسكت. لا انا مش هسكت. يعني انا مش هاخد الموضوع يعني بمعنى اصح يديني على قفايا وانا ايه؟ نايم. مش مشكله. لا في مشكله. There is a problem here. فلو ناديت على العيل وما جاش انا هقولها له لا لو ناديت عليك مرتين المره الثانيه هاخد منك اللعبه. يس. ما هو لازم يعرف برضو ان انا هاخد منه فيديو جيم بس الحاجه اللي هو بيحبها وزي ما قلت اخرها ساين اوت في الاوضه من غير لعب. يقعد وشه في الحيطه 5 دقايق لغايه لما نخلص اخرها يعني.
طب هل الديسبلين زي ما قلنا بيختلف مع شخصيه الطفل؟ في طفل بيبقى عنيد قوي، في طفل بيبقى حساس، في طفل
يس ديفينتلي في عيل بيجي من الكلام السؤال. انا اقول لكم على حته التيكينج اواي ثينجز. فاكر انا قلت لكم القصه دي مره؟ قلت لكم بنت كانت مش عندها مشكله مع امها، امها كل شويه تقول لي ايه، كل ما اخد منها حاجه تقول لي ايه يعني طز. I took away her computer. She said طز. I took away his cell phone. قالت لي طز. I don't care. I took away مش عارف ايه. It's okay. قلت لها مش معقول. دي هرمت؟ دي رهبه يعني؟ انا مش فاهم انا ايه قلت لها بالتاكيد في حاجه. She definitely had a weakness. Try to find it. بس لغايه لما اجت بعد اسبوع قالت لي I found it. قلت لها what did you find? قالت لي her makeup. The minute she took the makeup, she looked with tears like she was dying. I thought, you're kidding me, you're kidding me. I took the makeup. You have to find the weakness. Everybody has a weakness. The devil knows it. احنا كبيرنس we shouldn't do it. We should. Everybody has a weakness. Yeah, it could be the cell phone, it could be the laptop, it could be the مكعبات, it could be الحاجة اللي أنا أقدر أوصل لها كأب وهم أنا أذكى منهم. مش معقول هم يبقوا أذكى مني. خلاص؟ Are we? Yes.
Well, you talked like a lot about negative reinforcements. What's the
Positive reinforcement?
Yeah.
We should read. The best way I found for healthcare especially for positive reinforcement that I think is very good and I believe it's the best I can think of is behavioral charts. Why behavioral charts is my favorite? ليه؟ عشان مفيش instant rewarding. You're building habits. The instant reward is a sticker. Something more meaningful than materialistic. يعني to get a sticker على الشارت بتاعتي كطفل I look forward to it. عارفين انتوا البيهيفيرال تشارتس كلكم؟ behavioral charts بعلق شارت على الثلاجة ولا في المطبخ وبعمل خط انا برسمه بايدي، بعمل احيانا تعبان، اعمل طريق، اعمل سلم تعبان، وبعدين I give every time he does what he needs to do I give him a sticker. The child gets so excited about the sticker and he will be very in pain when I take the sticker out. I give them a warning, tell them when you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm going to take the sticker out. As if you do what I want you to do, you will get the sticker. In 2 weeks, start with 2 weeks, I'll give you a gift. When you collect all the stickers, ما احنا بنعمل التعبان انا بعمله كده مثلا من تحت لفوق وفي اخر التعبان احط له ايه؟ عربيه، طياره، مكعبات، ارسمها له بايدي. So he's always looking to get ايه اللي هيحصل؟ What will happen? He is building up, dreaming, looking forward. الميزه بتاعتها 3 حاجات. واحده you don't give them instant gratification. ما بتدوش هتعمل دي هديك لعبه. طب بعدين you need a portion. كل يوم عايزاه يعمل حاجه ولا عايز يعمل حاجه you need to buy him something. You're not going to get there. This is number 1. Number 2, you develop a habit. صح؟ And if you want to teach them how to make up their bed, to brush their teeth, to pray before they go to sleep, if you want to teach them how to read their Bible, you develop a habit, repeating it every day. The third and the most important is you teach them how to plan, to look ahead. You get them out of the mind, I want it now. This is the most important, that I can actually wait and save for it. This is extremely important. If you keep the behavioral charts, I am sure you will teach your kids a lot. I think that's a positive reinforcement. Okay? Okay, add this.
ساعات يقول العلم بيوصل ان هم زي البيت كده لا يعني لا هو مش يعني مهما صعبت الموضوع في العقاب هو عشان ينزل دماغه هو يعني مش عايز يعمل اللي انا عايزاه.
يعني مثلا شلنا ستيكر فهو عيط شويه وبتاع وستيل مش عايز يعمل اللي انت عايزه. مثلا عملت قلت له خلاص مش هنشتري كذا او مش هننزل المشوار الفلاني، عيط شويه وزعل وستيل برضه مش عايز يعمل اللي انت عايزه. يعني هو الموضوع اخر معاه لدرجه ان هو مع انها حاجه عملها كتير قبل كده مثلا كتير في الجول دي حاجه المفروض هو عملها كتير وحاجه يعني مش يعني حاجه هو كان دوت يعني.
That's a tough one. Yes. So you have to break him. You have to break his will, strong will. You have to. There's no other way. You have to make him realize that there's an authority, not in a destructive way. Don't destroy the child. مش كده يعني. بس أنا عايز أقول persistence. I think أنا هبقى زي الصونة مشروخة. You're not going to do it. That's it. When Baba says no, it is no. When Baba says do this, we're going to do it. وبعدين
هم
I think
بيناموا من كتر النوم اللي بيسمعوه.
I think it is helpful برضه ان في الوقت اللي كويس ان احنا ما عندناش conflict. I teach him about what is the blessing of listening to Baba Mo. يعني I also have to reinforce and it's a good thing. واشوف هدور على videos و stories about what happens when little animals and little kids listen to their parents. يعني انا برضه مش سايب الموضوع، ده موضوع مهم. فانا برضه بشجعه من الناحيه الثانيه انه يفهم ان دي فيها ايه؟ يا بركه. احنا دلوقتي in enemy territory. What's wrong?
I think it's good يعني ان هم respect equally ان هو هم قالوا له consequences ان انت لو ما عملتش كده مش هتروح الحته الفلانيه وهو صمم خلاص they respect his choice بس at the same time they insist ان احنا مش هنروح الحته الفلانيه عشان انت ما عملتش كده.
لا ده هو عايز يعمل حاجه بس مش فارق معاه. يروح ما يروحش ما يفرقش معاه.
لا بس I think كان بيعيط
لا بيعيط بس بعد ما يعيط ما بيعملش حاجه.
ما بيعملش بس it's okay يعني بس I remember the story اللي قريتها واحده كانت بتروح دكتور السنان so her parents مصممه مش هروح لدكتور السنان her parents قالوا لها it's okay but you can't go to your friend's house after that يعني if you don't go to the dentist you won't be able to go to this play day so she changed her mind but let's say she didn't change her mind and she insisted I'm not going to the dentist I think parents at this point should respect her wishes
خلاص
but it should be known that she
Yes.
has to yeah she has to
the
apply by
consequences applied.
yeah.
مظبوط صح.
حتى لو حصلت
اللي مرة مشينا وسيبناه دخلنا علينا الشقة ومشينا قلنا مش هنعرف معاه
That's tough. Don't do
هو
that
كان
again.
قاعد جوه ربع ساعة تلت ساعة مع نفسه
Don't do it again يا تريزا.
بس دي حاجة اللي بيقولوا don't ask for something you can't
أيوة.
never be able to live without it.
Don't do it
I've done
again
so
يا
many times
تريزا.
before where I ask for things that I
اه
cannot do and then
لما
I
في مرة حلتها قالت له راجل
اللي
كده
هي
وقاعد
بنقول
دلوقتي.
لو ما عملتش كذا احنا هنمشي ونسيبك فدي
دلوقتي واقفين قدامه في الشقة برضه بس هو اللي عنده مش أي حاجة بتقلقه هو مش في الباب
انا بس هي منى عندها بوينت انتوا طالما عملت الكونسيكونس هو هيخلي حياته miserable. His life will be miserable. He's not going to have anything fun. If you keep doing this over and over again, everything you're going to say to home chase him. Anyway.
What about like rewarding this? Like rewarding for the stuff they should do? You know, like, is that recommended? Like, so they should like listen to you, or they should do this chore, or they should do that. So if they're not doing it, is it okay to say, okay, I'm going to give you a candy or whatever? Or
I don't think rewarding for the given things is a good idea. It is when you want to develop habits that we add. But to listen to the parents, rewarding for this makes it an option. We don't want to do that. We don't want to do this as an option. Like I do it, I will be rewarded. If I don't do it, I don't want the reward. No, it's not an option.
Janice, one time he went to somebody's house, he wanted to do a show for them, and he told him, I'm gonna clean the bed for you, give me $2.
Okay.
He did it for somebody, clean the bed, and he gave him $2. But my husband, I was so mad. I didn't know how to tell. I told him it's okay to help others, but don't take anyone from anyone. So I didn't know.
Hey, it's a positive and negative. This is something I will not be very aggressive with.
He
Yeah,
came
positive
home
that
and
he
said,
is.
"Do something."
He has a mentality that he should work and get money. This is
Yes,
okay.
yes,
This is
yes.
nice.
Because one time I was sleeping, I wake up, I found all the dishes in the wash.
And he asked you for money.
Everything is fine. It's like,
That's
oh my
beautiful.
God. He is good in helping.
I wouldn't be so sad about it.
To take money?
Yeah, this is a mentality, but he's too young for this.
Yeah.
That's the thing. خلاص we're done with this. I want to go into talking about raising up boys and girls. If you need a break, let's take a break. If you don't need a break, we're going to go into the videos. Is that okay? Okay. I want to start with. أنت عايزة تمشي جيجي؟
لا حد جاي لي بيحاول يجي.
طيب. There is a lot about bringing up girls but there's a little about bringing up boys. And there's one about bringing up boys that I think I like the most.
Parents have known for generations that boys are different than girls. That's hardly a new idea. I mean, for 5,000 years we've understood that. There's been no debate about it. But in the late 60s, and some of you aren't old enough to remember this, but in the late 60s, a really goofy idea came along. A really crazy idea. And it was the notion that males and females are identical except for the ability to bear children. And that boys and girls are different only to the degree to which they've been raised differently. Gloria Steinem at that time said, parents need to have the courage to raise their boys more like girls. And so there has been this culture-wide effort to implement this simple idea that boys and girls are identical except for the ability to bear children. Believe it or not, boys and girls like different things because they are different. At six years of age, a girl is about 6 months ahead of a guy in terms of language development. And it stays that way. I mean, even into adult life, women have more proficiency with language. Now, this is a very important question that I want to ask you all. Is masculinity good or is it bad? Is it right or is it wrong? Are boys biologically defective? What you see and what we're talking about today, is that the result of the fact that boys need to be fixed, that they're not quite the way they ought to be? Is that the design? Is that the plan? Testosterone is not one of God's big mistakes, although it is true that girls seem to have most of the right stuff. I mean, they do. They make better grades in school, they get along better with their teachers, they get into fewer problems, they challenge the system less often, they get hurt less often. Have you noticed that girls don't like pain? They don't. And if they make a mistake, they try real hard not to make it again. If boys get hurt, they think it's bad luck. And they go back and do it again. Because they're coming from a different part of the universe. So the question is, would it be better if boys were raised more like girls, as Gloria Steinem suggested? Boys are men in training. Don't resist this nature. It was God's design. Don't fight it. Don't try to manipulate it. Go with the flow. It's not a mistake. It's not an accident. And begin to get those boys ready for the role of provider and protector that's built into their nature. They're men in training. Teach them to be respectful to women. Teach them never to hit a girl. Teach them never to take anything from a girl that doesn't belong to him, something that is precious to her. Teach him to give. Teach him to be a person of self-control. Teach him to be loyal. Teach him to be honest. Teach him to care for others. Teach him self-discipline. You just don't let this aggressiveness run wild. You have to civilize it. You have to shape it. You have to mold it. And that is your primary responsibility with boys. And teach them reverence for God and for His principles. That's the responsibility we have, not to make them like girls, and not to resent the fact that they are not quiet and cooperative and easygoing. Yeah, they are sometimes harder to raise. Not always, sometimes girls can be hard to raise too. But boys are typically harder to raise. Go with that. Accept it. It's the way boys are. Boys are in a great deal of trouble today. Most parents do not know this. Many school teachers do not know this. But the child development clinics around the country, on the university campuses, the child development experts are all saying this. I mean, this is appearing in the child development journals. Research is coming out on it. And there's really not much doubt now that boys are in a great deal of difficulty. That problem has to do with the breakup of the family, the disintegration of the family. And it is, of course, taking place at a very rapid level. This is why, you see, divorce is so much more difficult for boys than it is girls. The research all shows this. The things I'm telling you today are not simply my opinion. This is what the perspective now is by those who study children. This is one of the reasons boys don't know what it means to be a boy. They don't know what it means to be a man because they haven't seen it modeled. And this is why single mothers simply must find a role model for their boys. They need to find it from Boy Scouts. They need to find it from boys' clubs, or perhaps from a coach in organized sports or disorganized sports, any kind of masculine leadership. But they need to find it somewhere because a mother is simply not equipped to explain to a boy what it means to be a man. And there must be a man there somewhere to make this happen.
Robert Stoller said masculinity is an accomplishment, it's an achievement.
I like this guy. This is Joseph Nicolosi. He's studying male homosexuality. He's a famous guy, most hated by all the big authorities in counseling. This is the guy who wrote the book. James Dobson invited him to talk about the reasons why boys become gays. This is a very serious talk. And one of the reasons he said is there is no strong father in the life of the boy, and there's a very strong mother. There is not a strong father, but the mother is very strong. And then very early in life, the mother pulls the boy toward her. So he sides with the mother at age 2 or 3. So this is extremely important discussion right now that's going on. It's really very convincing. This guy is in a big fight, big heated fight.
And this might explain why we have more male homosexuality than lesbianism. Some people say 2 to 1, 5 to 1, 7 to 1, because it's easier to be female than it is to be male. If you do nothing, the male will not become masculine. Something has to happen. You know, so-called primitive societies, we have rites of initiation, male initiation rites, but we don't have that. We're losing sight of that. Everything is co-ed activities. So the boy needs special help in making that masculine adjustment.
Many boys of all ages have no clue what it means to be masculine because they've never seen it modeled. It's certainly not on television. They have not seen it in the movies, and many of them have not seen it at home. I've mentioned this already in one of the videos, that when our son was 5 years of age, we would go out to get in the car. The whole family was going to go to eat. And there are 4 of us, a boy and a girl, and Shirley and me. And Ryan would very typically say, "Hey, Dad." I'd say, "What?" He'd say, "Us guys will sit in the front seat. The girls will sit in the back seat." Now, he wasn't lording this over his sister and his mother. He was saying, "I'm like you. I'm a guy like you. Us guys are going to sit in the front seat." And that was a healthy thing, you know, and he was identifying with me. He said, "I want to be a man like you."
A little twist on that, my interpretation, the first time I've heard this, I think he was lording it over this. The boy has to...
Well, I didn't want to say that.
Part of being a boy is feeling that being a boy is special. You're lucky to be a boy.
And I know it sounds chauvinistic, and we'll teach him later about reality, but right now, at that point, he really needs to feel it special.
You know what? I affirm that. I went to a hunting trip in South Dakota recently, and there are about 20 people there. And I've done this for 7 or 8 years. I go every year with about 20 guys. And this year was the first year that the women had been invited, and a few sisters. And some of the boys that are invited are pretty young. One of them was 11 years of age, and he deeply resented that. He resented the fact that the women were invited. Now, it made for a very fun trip. You know, some of the women hunted, and some of them stayed in the lodge, but it was neat having them there. So I didn't object to that, but he did, and I understood it. And he felt like, man, this is a guy thing. This is something us guys do together. And he resented the fact that his sister and his mother were invited to come along.
And this is why this co-ed activity is really not such a healthy thing, I think. Boys need to be separate to affirm their masculinity. They need to be away from girls, have that distance, so that they can be so solid in their masculinity that then they can return to women, but return to them as men. So it's like a pendulum. You leave the mother, you deepen your sense of masculinity, and then with that, you can return to women and be in relationship with them.
What advice would you give to a single mom who has a sensitive boy and the father is either absent or, in worst case scenario, gay himself?
Again, you have more work to do because you don't have a father around. So you have to affirm his masculinity. You have to make him feel good as a boy, not only as your child in the neutered sense, but as your son, as your boy. Also, I would try to find some father figure. Maybe an older brother, your father, a father figure who can get more involved with this boy if the father is not being involved.
And you can find role models for them, but you have to work hard to find them. And you can't do it. I hate to say it, you're not equipped to show a boy what it means to be a man because you've never been there. Now, most women were little girls when they were young. And so you can't do that. So, Boy Scouts, boys clubs, church youth groups, youth pastors who are male and who are confident in who they are and who will affirm your boys, school teachers, coaches, organized sports. There are so many places that you can get it, but you absolutely have to get it. An uncle, as you said, or a neighbor, or someone who can show your boy what it means to be male. You've got to find that, don't you?
I think this is a very important issue about bringing up boys. What do you get out of it? ايه طلعنا منه من القصة دي، من الكلمتين دول عن الولاد؟
Make them love their man by being a boy.
مين يعمل كده؟
I do this all the time.
ما هو
Well, a man like him.
لازم الأب. هنا بقى المشكلة الكبيرة. الأب هيبقى له دور مع الولد ومع البنت.
ما ينفعش الأم إن هي تقول له من سن صغير أنت راجل I want you to take care of this in the house I want you like if she doesn't have the man to do it.
Like his man.
هي حاجة كل الحاجات اللي احنا بنعملها في حياتنا حتى على مستوى الكنيسة 10% كلام و90% ايه؟ modeling. هتديله 10%. That's all what you can give. Maximum 10%.
بس لو الأم بتشتغل الأمور شايفها
عمره ما يشوفها راجل. عمره ما يشوفها راجل. ايه السبب ان الجماعة الهوموسيكشوال كتروا في امريكا وفي الغرب؟ تفتكروا؟ Single mothers. There is no fathers in this culture. Very little. للأسف. محتاجين يتصدر لهم شوية رجال بس ما حدش يسمع. الأب ساب المهمة بتاعته. واحدة من الحاجات اللي أنا سمعتها واحد من الناس اللي كان بيتكلم على الخدمه في شيكاغو، كان بيقول في شيكاغو في داون تاون في عندهم عيال كتير من غير اسر، ابائهم الكحوليك وجانجز وكلام صعب جدا. فبيقولوا له ايه الراجل لما راح يخدم هناك، الراجل اللي ماسك الخدمه في الحتت دي قال له اوعى تكلمهم عن الله انه اب، ما تقولهمش الله اب، وما تعلمهمش ابانا الذي. ليه؟ لان الابوه عندهم شيء وحش، فالدنيا ضايعه، كلهم جايز وكلهم اشكالهم من البلاوي. طيب انا بس اللي عايز اقوله في دور للاب مع الولد، ايه الدور بتاعه مع الولد؟ ايه دور الاب مع الولد؟ شوفوا الكلمتين اللي قالهم في الاخر، الراجل جوزيف نيكولوسي ده برضه بيقول نفس الكلام اللي بيقوله جيمس دوبسون. الاب لازم يعلم الولد ازاي يبقى ايه؟ راجل. حاجتين عليه، ياخده بره يقعد معاه وقت، يروح يصطادوا سمك، يصطادوا غزلان، يعملوا ريسلينج، يلعبوا فوتبول، كل الاكتيفيتيز اللي ممكن يعملها ايه؟ الولد. والاب هو اللي بيعلمه، هو اللي بيسلمه، يطلع معاه يرسل معاه في الجنينه، يقصوا الحشيش مع بعض، اي حاجه الاب يعملها، لان هو الولد بيعمل ايه؟ خلي بالك يا صغيرين حاطين عينيهم عليكم، حاطين عينيهم علينا. ده دي مهمه قوي عشان اعرف ان انا ايه؟ راجل زي ابويا. الحاجه الثانيه اللي قالها ايه كمان؟ قال علموا الولد ان يحترم البنت ويخاف ربنا. الاب هو اللي بيعلم ابنه كده، ان يخاف ربنا، يحترم البنات، ما ياخدش منهم حاجه هم مش عايزين ايه؟ يدوها، ومش من حقهم ياخدوا، وعن تضمين الكلام ده. تمام؟ فدي نقط مهمه جدا ان احنا لازم ناخد بالنا منها. وبعدين الحاجه الثانيه، لو في حد ما الاب مش موجود، بتديه للخادم، تشوف له خادم، تشوف له حد مدرس يكون كويس وكوتش، بس طبعا بحرص، يعني لازم ننقي ونشوف مين اللي ينفع مين ما ينفعش برضه. تمام؟ دي نقطة مهمة في تربية الولاد. يبقى الأب هو المسؤول عن تسليم الولد كل شيء. يعني هتلاقوا إن هو مسؤول عن البنت برضه شو بقى كده؟ لا، لابسها من فوق ومن تحت. اللي بعده. البنت بقى بشوية لبس. في كلام ولا عايزين؟ The final part is about the bringing up girls. تربية البنات. طبعا احنا عرفنا من تربيه الولاد، احنا في الفتره اللي فاتت بس نراجع سريع كلمتين صغيرين على اللي حصل. يبقى اول حاجه في حكايه التربيه، الديسيبلين. ايه البوينتس اللي احنا بنفتكرها؟ What do you need to remember in discipline? To create borders for the kids, and the borders are important too for their security, so they feel secure, they feel safe. That's very important, more than for us. So هو حتى قال الستيتمنت اللي قالها جيمس دوبسون، قال ايه؟ You don't discipline them. You practice discipline for them. You practice discipline for them, not to them. يعني انت you're not trying to establish authority. You're actually trying to help them feel secure and grow. So this is important. That's important. The next point, another point, to differentiate between
willful defiance and irresponsible trust.
Exactly, willful defiance versus irresponsible childish behavior. The childish behavior I should not be. يعني فرق ما بين التصرف الطفولي اللي مش مسؤول وبين واحد بيتحدى الايه؟ بيتحدى السلطان بتاع الابوه والامومه. لازم افرق بينهم. طب الاولاني تعمل معاه ايه؟ What do you do with the childish this irresponsibility?
Just tell him that this is wrong. You should not repeat it again, but don't punish him.
There is no punishment when I show love. لأن هو بيبقى scared. Most of the time he gets scared. I broke something. I did something wrong. I'm very scared. My mother would be angry. No, I'm not angry.
But,
I actually.
But try to be careful next time.
Yeah, بس gently with love. واحنا خدنا بالنا من الطريقه اللي الممثلين عملوا بيها الديالوج. قلنا من الحاجات المهمه ان لما العيل اتكلم معاه اعمل ايه؟ انزل له. I don't control. هي الفكره ها؟ كده ايه؟
هو يطلع
ما هيطلع لك هو الموضوع ده
بالنسبه لنا هو طبيعي.
انا اقول لك حاجه، هو هيطلع لك. This is inevitable. He's gonna come up to you at one point هو هيبقى اطول منك وهيبص لك كده. I know هو طالع بس على الاقل في دلوقتي في الفتره دي لازم اعمل ايه؟ ننزل. ايه تاني we had discovered from the discipline part. There are the six steps. If you can remember the most important three would be great. 6 steps of discipline.
Set boundaries, like set the rules.
Yes, you have to set boundaries, and he said the boundaries have to be clear, but also not very hard. You can do it. Now, number 2. Give me 2 or 3, and I just said 1, 2, 3.
Have consequences.
That they have to identify when they break it. ما تبقاش oblivious. You talked about Dr. Oblivious. PhD, ADHD, BAGAS, or JAS, DHD. ما تبقاش oblivious، يعني ما تبقاش قاعد كده مطنش. لو اتكسرت يبقى اتكسرت، يبقى لازم هعمل ايه؟ أنا قاعد لك، مش هسيبها، مش هفوتها. I'm really أنا نفسي اكتشفت ال power of doing this. Consequences have to be consistent. لازم الكونسستنسي، يعني هعملها كل مره. عشان كده برضو الواحد لازم يفكر ان الكونسيكونسز تبقى اقدر عليها. ما اعملش كونسيكونسز ما اقدرش عليها. يمكن اعملها مره، لكن المره الثانيه يعني مثلا اقول له ايه مثلا كونسيكونس لو انت ما سمعتش الكلام انا هاخدك اجريك حوالين البلوك 6 مرات، يبقى لازم انا انزل واقعد بقى مستنيه واجري معاه عشان فانا مش هقدر اعمل كده، فانا هحسبها كل مره هعمل كده هعمل ايه؟ الثالثه the third one. Give me these 3. بعد ما تخلص الكونسيكونس ايه نعمل؟ I explain ليه ده حصل. I explain ليه حصل. I explain to him why did I do this and what's wrong with what he did. أنا قلت لك وحذرتك أنت ما سمعتش الكلام عشان كده إحنا دلوقتي في الموقف اللي إحنا فيه. And then you add كانت نمرة 6 إيه؟ You immerse the whole process in love. Don't take it personally. ما تخليش الموضوع personal. Don't let the kids feel like you are actually personally against them. ما تخليش الموضوع يبقى موضوع شخصي. أو ده قاعدة تمشي عليها لما البوليس إحنا بنزعل. بيوقفنا دايما نفكر فيها كده، البوليس بيوقفك عشان عملت speeding ticket بيعمل إيه؟ Sir, you know what the speed limit? Yes, it is 45 miles an hour. You know what you were doing? I think I was doing 60. No, you were doing 70. In a 45 miles zone. Here's your ticket. لو البوليس قال كلمة زيادة I can take him back to court. Right? It is not personal. You broke the borders, you get consequences, end of the story. خلاص؟ النقطة بتاع bringing up boys, any points خدنا أي نقط من تربية الأولاد؟ جيمس توبسون قال لي على تربية الأولاد ونيكولوسي. Who's the most important to bring the masculinity of the boy? The father. The father is responsible to that identity. Like, what does the father do? بيعمل إيه؟
He should train the boys to be a man.
Train him to be a man, and also train him to teach him to respect girls, not to harm, because they have tendency to be aggressive, violent. And he said civilize them, teach them, educate them. Most important, model the masculinity for them. لازم أعمل لهم المثل ده. ولو ما فيش أب أعمل إيه؟ لو في single mother, what should do? James Dobson قال you have to find a role model for your boy. A single mother will never be able to. كان في discussion كنا بنتكلم بنقول we can teach a mother can say to them be a man, I like you to be a man, I want you to be a man, all that stuff. This will only work for 10%. 10% من القصة كلام. لكن هتعمل 90% باقيين مش هتلاقيها، مش هتقدر. قال لها انت هو قال كلمة تضحك، قال most women were girls when they were young. هو بيقول يعني معظم الستات وهم صغيرين، معظمهم مش كلهم، كانوا بنات وهم صغيرين. يعني. نتكلم على البنات شوية. هناخد نمرة 3. Bringing up girls, question 3. I think I need to start from the beginning.
Well, academically, especially when compared to boys, but we have a growing concern for them now. Girls are under enormous pressure that was not experienced by their mothers and their grandmothers and great-grandmothers because things have changed in the culture. They're expected to grow up too fast in a way that's harmful to them. Consider the consequences of some of the evidences of turmoil, including anorexia and bulimia, the eating disorders. And that's occurring for children as young as 5 years of age. 40% of girls in the 4th grade, 9 and 10 years of age, have attempted to diet because they don't like the way they look. And many of them, when they get a little bit older, get into laxatives and diet pills and vomiting and extreme exercise. All of this tells you something is going on inside. Eating disorders are not the only concerns, of course. There is cutting and mutilating and piercing and bullying behavior and sexually aggressive behavior that was not there 10, 20, 30 years ago in the same numbers. Sexually transmitted diseases are spreading. Unwanted pregnancy. All of these, again, are evidences of an inner turmoil that we have reason to be concerned about. This decline in the well-being of girls is often related to a form of self-hatred that plagues many girls. Their role models in the entertainment industry set a standard of beauty that's simply unattainable for most. And they hate themselves for what they are and what they can never be. They're also being taught that the only source of empowerment and love, which they crave, is to give themselves sexually to boys. And that leads to disillusionment and rejection and depression. You know, the boy typically gets what he came after, he gets what he wants, and the girls feel used and abused. There are many other sources for this self-hatred, but these are the major ones.
خليني أترجم اللي هو قاله. البنات، ودي حاجة حقيقية، لما يعني لو خدمتوا في مجموعة كبيرة من البنات هتعرفوا إن في حاجة إحنا ما كنتش أعرفها قبل كده. كمية كبيرة جدا من مشاكل يسموها إيه؟ eating disorders. مشاكل الأكل. عندهم حاجة عجيبة جدا. أنا من 6-7 سنين في الكنيسة عندنا اكتشفت مثلا اتليست في بوسطن في بتاع 9-10 بنات قاطعين الأكل تماما والوزن بتاعهم عمال ينزل مرة واحدة. كتير قوي ألاحظ من غير ما حد يقول لي حاجة بنات لابسين كمام طويلة مؤدبين، بس مجرد تفرد ايدها كده تلاقي ايه خطوط حمراء كده بالعرض. بيعملوا ايه؟ بيقطعوا نفسهم. جوه الكيس الطيب بتاعتنا. طب ايه المعنى؟ ليه؟ ليه بيعملوا كده؟ وليه داخلين في عملية دايت جامدة جدا فظيعة؟ غالبا الفكرة اللي هو بيقولها وده الصح، ده اللي معظم الناس بيكتشفوا، عندهم كره نفسيهم، ما بيحبوش نفسيهم خالص. من سن 6-7 سنين تبدأ البنت تتفرج على التلفزيون، تتفرج على أفلام، وتشوف الايه؟ الموديلات الرفيعين اللي لابسين ازاي، اللي شكلهم ايه. الميديا هوليوود والافلام عملوا صوره للبنت عجيبه شويه، صوره مش موجوده. طلعوا البنت من الصوره الطبيعيه بتاعت البني ادم لصوره الايه؟ الاله، لا الهه فينوس، حاجه لا يمكن الواحد يقدر يوصل لها ابدا. فلما البنت تقعد تتفرج على نفسها في المرايه وتبص على بتشوف في الافلام، تنتهي بايه؟ تتعقد. هي الكلمه المصريه بتاعتنا بتتعقد. العقده دي بتبان ازاي؟ طب انا ماليش حل تاني، طب ايه حلي؟ ماليش حل. فتبدا بقى تعمل، بيتهيألها لو هي ما كلتش، بيبدا يخش بقى ده نوع من الاوبسيشن، لو ما كلتش ونزلت وزنها هتبقى ايه؟ هتحلو. something يحصل. زي ما انا فاكر انا كنت صغير وكنت بلعب، كانت اول مره اكل ايس كريم بعد ما اكلت ايس كريم، انا فاكر كويس قوي القصه دي. وبعدين رحت كان 3 سنين، لقيت الصابونه على البانيو فيها رغاوي كده، رحت طبق فيه وقعدت اندب. طعمها مش حلو. انا فاكر كويس قوي الفكره قالت لي ايه؟ لو نضغت كمان شويه هتحلو. فده اللي بيحصل، ان هم بيفكروا لو زودوها شويه، طب كمان شويه، طب كمان شويه. اللي بيحصل بعد كده ان هم بيدخلوا في سكه، يعني بتبدا كده وبعدين تعمل ايه؟ كده 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 وبعدين بيموتوا. كتير من البنات اللي عندهم انوركسيا بيموتوا. ده حاجه موضوع خطير جدا، والسبب بتاعها هي الميديا. فده اول نقطه هو بيركز عليها، بيقول عندنا مشكله في المجتمع بتاعنا. طب جايه منين المشكله دي؟ غير الميديا، غير ان هوليوود عملت او بتاع الموفيز عملوا الفكره الصعبه دي للبنات، صعبه حياتهم.
I've given a great deal of attention in this book to the question, what can parents do to help their kids cope, especially their daughters? And as it is with so many other aspects of child development, everything comes down to the quality of parenting and the amount of time and attention given to a youngster. This is especially true in the relationship between girls and their fathers, and that's a fact that's often underestimated. Many fathers fail to comprehend just how badly they're needed by their daughters. In fact, girls need their dads as much as boys do, and that's not common knowledge in families today. Often fathers look right past their daughters. The father is the first man in a little girl's life. He's the first to tell her he loves her. He's the first to hug her and affirm her, and she needs that affirmation. I saw this illustrated a while back when I brought 40 female students, these were juniors and seniors in college, into a room. We sat around a table, I served them lunch and then began talking to them. And more than that, they began talking to me. They were between 20 and 24 years of age, and I asked them to tell me what I needed to write in this book. I asked them to express their own desires, what they would hope would be included in bringing up girls. And something very unusual happened. Within a few minutes, most of those girls, or many of them, were in tears when they talked about their relationship with their fathers. They were not angry at their dads. They were not striking out against them. But they were trying to describe their longing for affirmation. And again, that phrase, they acted like they didn't even see me. I wasn't there. And they went around the table, and one after the other expressed this concern, this longing inside. And then the girls began talking to each other and said, I thought I was the only one. But the truth of the matter was, it was the subject that they went straight to. They made a beeline for their dads when given an opportunity to talk about the men in their lives, the men in their lives. And that is included in the book in some detail. Let me offer some specific advice to fathers, to dads, on how to build a relationship with a daughter, because that's something that it doesn't come naturally to a man. In fact, it's hard enough for him to understand his wife. She comes with a different set of emotions and different set of things, and often he doesn't realize that he needs to get into the world of his daughter as well. How is he going to do that? It is done with what I call 3 T's. 3 T's of connecting with girls. The first is talk. Girls and women, more than boys and men, connect emotionally through conversation. And when conversation breaks down, females of all ages tend to feel wounded and frustrated and disrespected. Girls feel abandoned by dads who won't talk to them. It's in their DNA. The second T is touch. Just like their mothers, they need to be hugged every day. And, something happens in puberty that is very important for me to emphasize here. Because this is in the research now. It was not there 15 years ago or 10 years ago. As a girl develops and her breasts begin to grow and she begins to round out, men get very nervous about hugging their daughters. They don't want to do anything inappropriate, and they don't want to be misunderstood. And it's not a sexual thing, and yet it is. And so what men begin to do when puberty occurs is to lean back. I call it the Leaning Tower of Pisa. A man is just a little nervous about what is taking place when he sees his daughter beginning to develop. But I want to tell you something. The daughter sees it too, and she doesn't understand it. And she often wonders what's changed. Doesn't Dad love me anymore? Why won't he hug me? Why won't he show physical affection to me? The father is still doing that with the younger kids. He is wrestling with the girls and with the boys, and they're on his lap and they're hugging him, and the dad is showing something different. It's a mistake to do that. Go on doing what you've always done. Your daughter needs to be hugged, especially at the most insecure time of her life. The third T is time. Let me give you an illustration. When my daughter Danae was 5 years of age, I was looking for ways to connect with her. And that's a good time to start in those preschool years. And so on a Saturday morning, we would get our bicycles out. By that time, she could ride her little bicycle. And we would take off together and go to a local school, a public school, where there was a sandbox. And we would play in the sand. And Danae loved it. And I would make castles. I taught her what a moat was, and I taught her what a drawbridge is. And we just built these things together. And we had so much to talk about. I talked about anything she seemed to be interested in. And then we would get back on our bikes, and I had a little wire basket on the back of the bicycle. And in it was a little recorder, a little playback machine. And I had a tape, a cassette tape that I had made of Cinderella, the Rodgers and Hammerstein story of Cinderella, and I recorded it off television. I don't know whether it's legal, but I did it. And we would play that, and we would sing those songs. We came to love them. I enjoyed them too. And so we would ride along singing those stories of Cinderella, which Danae really loved and was really into. Then we would go to a taco stand and we would have lunch. I don't know how nutritious that was, but it was good. And then we came home. And so what that cost me? Maybe 2 hours, 3 hours that I could have been working on something else. And yet the foundation of our relationship was laid during that time. And I'll never forget it, and I don't think that they will either. Now, just remember this, dads. Girls are made out of the same stuff that their mothers are. They like to be loved, they like to be hugged, they like to be talked to, and they like to be needed. And you do that, and you will have a lifelong relationship with your daughter.
What are the 3 T's? Time, talk, and touch. I like the idea of the leaning tower. بيقول ايه؟ بيقول ان البنت هي المصغر بتاع امها. فكأن الزوج اللي بتحتاج لابوها. فكأن الزوج محتاج يتعامل معاها كأنثى تانية في البيت. فبيقول الآتي، بيقول البنت زي الأم محتاجة إنها تتكلم، ولازم الأب إيه؟ يسمع ويلاقي طريقة يتكلم معاها، يلاقي لها فرصة تتكلم، ولازم تبقى واحد لواحد، ما ينفعش إنها تتكلم في مجموعة، مش هتاخد الإيه؟ الانتباه بتاعه. أي بنت أو أي زوجة لما بتبقى عايزة الانتباه بتاع زوجها، ما ينفعش إنه يكون في وسط مجموعة أو في قعدة. لازم مان تو مان. فبالتالي برضو البنت كده لازم يبقى واحد لواحد. فلو مثلا عندي بنتين في البيت او ربنا يكون معاه 4 لازم يعمل ايه؟ واحدة. وهو بيقول هنا، انا بيعجبني ان هو بيجيب اللي هو عمله في حياته. بيقول بحاول الاقي طريقه اتكلم بيها معاها، اشوف هي مهتمه بايه، عايزه تتكلم في ايه، وبتكلم في الحاجه اللي هي عايزه تتكلم من عندها 5 سنين. يبقى تتكلم. ايه تاني نقطة؟ لازم يحضنها. الأب لازم يحضن بنته. أحيانا وهو بيقول دي، ودي فعلا حقيقة، كتير ناس تشكي في الاعتراف يقول لي أنا مش فاهم، البنت بتكبر وأنا مش حاسس إن، أقول له لا، الكلام ده مش مظبوط. البنت من حقها إن أبوها إيه؟ يحضنها. هو بيبص على نفسه بطريقة يعني شيء غريب شوية. البنت بتكبر وبقت دلوقتي آنسة، الوضع مختلف. لا، هو مش مختلف بالنسبة لها، مختلف بالنسبة لك انت، لأن نظرتك اتغيرت، مش حصل لك حاجة. فهو بيسميه برج بيزا المائل. برج بيزا المائل لأن الراجل لما يجي يحضن بنته لو هي بتكبر في مرحلة البلوغ بيعمل إيه؟ بيروح مميل لورا كده. هو يسأل، شاف الموضوع ده كتير فابتدى عمل له عنوان يعني. فقال لا، ما تتكسفش وما تزعلش إن القصة بتحصل، لأن البنت مش هتفهم. كل اللي هتفهمه ان في حاجه حصلت خلت ابوها ايه؟ يقرف منها. ما هيش محبوبه زي زمان. مع ذلك هي محتاجه كده، محتاجه انها تحس بالفيزيكال تاتش. ليه اخوها او العيال الصغيرين يتحضنوا ويتباسوا؟ هي ايه؟ هتحس ان في حاجه غلط، وبعدين هتبتدي بقى تربي نوع من الكره الايه؟ يبقى انا فيا حاجه غلط، ده مش حلو. هيرجعنا تاني لفكره انها تكره نفسها. دي الحاجة اللي احنا محتاجين نعملها. برضه الأب مشكلته كبيرة، مش عارف الاقيها بنبقى منين. والثالثة هي إيه؟ يبقى توك، تاتش أند تايم. فقال لك 2 3 في الأسبوع مش هيخسرونا حاجة، لكن حاجات البنت تفتكرها للأبد. ماشي؟ اللي بعده.
I want to offer some advice to the fathers who were so busy when their daughters were young. And they were so distracted by all the pressures of living and earning a living that they never got around to affirming the worth of their daughters. They never made that connection. They never really felt a loving relationship between them. And the time went by so fast. And she came through adolescence, and now she's in adulthood. Maybe she's 20 or 30 or 40 years of age. The question is it too late to show love for that daughter now? The answer is no. It is never too late, because the longing for love that's within her is a lifelong ache. I have seen some men in their 60s or 70s realize the mistake they have made and then go to work to reconcile with that grown daughter. And they find that she is receptive to it. She will always need your love. You know, if there was a problem with alcoholism in the early days, and you've now conquered that, it's time to turn your attention to the one who was standing there waiting for you when she was a little girl. And I hope that just this comment will cause some men to say, I will connect with my daughter. Some of you might remember a book written by Marlo Thomas and her co-authors in the 1970s that sold millions of books. It had a major impact on the culture, and it was called Free to Be You and Me. It gave advice to parents, bad advice I might say. It was based on the false premise that parental influences are responsible for masculinity and femininity. Now, that idea was totally debunked a short time later by Dr. Luann Brizendine, who wrote a book called The Female Brain. Dr. Brizendine is a Yale-trained psychiatrist, and her book is absolutely outstanding. In fact, I devoted a whole chapter of my book, Bringing Up Girls, to Dr. Brizendine's book, because I don't know anyone who has said it better than she has. And she told a story about a mother who wanted to follow the advice of Marlo Thomas and the others. She was determined to shield her 3.5-year-old daughter from patriarchal cultural influences, and she wanted to teach her to be more like boys. So she gave the little girl unisex toys, and she gave her a red fire truck. And she wanted to get her to think more like a boy. Well, the mother came in the next morning and found the little girl sitting with the fire truck on her lap. And the fire truck was wrapped in a blanket. And the little girl was saying, "Don't worry, little truckie, it's going to be all right." This little girl was being prepared for motherhood. And the nurturing aspect of motherhood was a product of the female brain. So she was making the case that the idea of unisex is just foolish. Another researcher that I mentioned in my book was determined not to let her boys have guns or anything that looked like a gun. And she came in one day when her 2-year-old was playing with a cucumber and shot her with the cucumber. I mean, you can't avoid it. Boys are boys and girls are girls. And it's foolish and even harmful to try to change the sexual development of these youngsters.
I think we are done with the news. احنا خلصنا النيوز اللي عندنا. لو في أي حاجة أسئلة discussion we need to talk about. فاحنا دلوقتي highlighted أو احنا يعني شفنا الأهمية بتاعت الأب في القصة دي من ناحيتين. دوره مع الابن ودوره مع الابنة الاثنين مهمين. نعم؟ إيه ده؟
ودوره مع الزوجة.
ما دي اللي كانت امبارح.
دي امبارح ايوه.
امبارح احنا اتكلمنا على كده وقلنا ان اهم حاجه انه ايه؟ اهم حاجه انه يسمع. نسينا دي، احنا نسينا دي. اتفضل نصلي عشان ورانا حاجه.